Well, hello and welcome to the Silly Vicar Show Christmas special. That's why I've got the silly Santa hat on. And if you want to know more about Santa and all about that, have a look at my blog this week about all those annoying posts that we get about Santa at Christmas time. But today is our Christmas special, and what we're doing in the Christmas special is we're looking at the question, if Jesus was born in our world today, how would he be born? And to do that, what we've done is we've made our own little puppet show, which we'll follow in a minute. It's about 20 minutes long, so if you fancy a laugh, watch it. The kids helped me with the puppet show. It was absolutely brilliant. It's a great way to spend a Sunday afternoon. So sit down, relax, have a watch, and I'll see you in the new year on the Silly Vicar Show. Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas.
It was a warm, sunny spring day, and Mary had just finished her day at college in Stoke. She was in her first year, finishing her GCSEs the previous summer. Getting off the bus in town, she started to walk home to Fairfields. She was pleased that she had enough money left over to buy a drink on the cheap from Lidl's. Mary was a regular at church, and she sang in the music group, but over the last few months she had been far more excited about her first proper boyfriend. Back in September, she had met Joe in the festival centre in town. They both went to watch the same film and were talking afterwards. Joe was a fair bit older and had just started his own joinery business. Joe, after finishing his training, scraped together enough money for an old white van. On the side of it, it said, Joe's Joinery, just above the rusty patch on the side door. Mary was totally loved up that day, looking down at her phone as she crossed Lidl's car park, checking out the possibilities for her wedding dress, possibilities about where she would live. Her head was filled with love. Just as she was walking across, she didn't see a little person come up to her, and this little person she didn't know, which was unusual because Mary was proper Drayton. The person said, "Hello, Mary. You are greatly gifted and God is with you." This wasn't the type of thing that happened to anyone, especially in Lidl's car park. Mary looked at the person, totally perplexed by it all, although in her heart she felt a strange warmness, similar to what she felt in church. By the time this warmness felt as if it was overwhelming her, the world seemed to pass away. It was as if it was only her and this person that she could really see or hear. Time itself seemed to slow and everything seemed more vivid and more real. The person continued, "Don't be scared, Mary. You are greatly gifted by God. You will have a son and call him Jesus, as he will save his people from their sins. He is the one who has been waiting for, and to fulfill all that has been said in church. He will reign over his kingdom forever." Mary got hold of herself for a moment and said, "How can this happen? Me and Joe, well, we haven't, you know." The person said, "Nothing is impossible for God. Your cousin Liz is pregnant even though she's really old, and the doctor said she couldn't have any children." Mary stood there, overwhelmed with the warmth of her heart, and said, without even thinking, "Here I am. I am God's servant. Let it happen as God wants." Then, feeling a bit funny, she looked around to see the man. Or was he really a man? Or was he a boy? Just walking off. A bit odd. Didn't even begin to describe it. And Mary was sure that the parking guy in Lidl's thought she was very odd as he stared at her from a distance. What had happened? Was it real? Had she just not got enough sleep the night before? Was she going mental? Mary forgot about buying the drink and walked home, trying to make sense of it all. In lots of ways, it made no sense. Why was she important? Girl from Fairfields. Who was that person? But the feeling was real, and every part of her knew it. What of the promise? And what about all this baby business? 2 weeks later, Mary was in a real panic. She was a week late. Was what that person had said, was it true? Was it real? Mary sat there, scrolling through Google, trying to find out anything she could, all about pregnancy, whether this could happen. Could she go into town and buy a pregnancy kit from Boots? Trouble was, her mum knew the person who worked there, and what would they say? It would all go round town. They all love it when someone from church gets it wrong. Oh, that Mary. Ooh, she thinks she's so great, and look, ooh, I saw it in Boots. That's what'll happen. There was only one thing for it. To go to Hanley, to go and see Liz, to find out whether what that person had told her was true, and then while she was in Hanley, she could buy a pregnancy kit when nobody really knew her. So the following Saturday, Mary got on the bus to find out whether any of this was real or any of this was true. Going up the street to Liz's house, Mary was beyond nervous. She was terrified. That look that the woman had given her in Boots, the look that said, "Stupid girl." Perhaps that's what everybody thought, stupid girl. After a deep breath, she rang Liz's doorbell. Liz answered and was overcome with pure joy, that same joy that Mary had felt when the person had talked to her in the car park. Liz pulled Mary inside and shut the door and hugged each other and said, "Mary, you are full of grace. The Lord is with you. Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child inside you." As Liz hugged Mary, the same joy filled her, as she knew then more than ever that it was all true. Throwing all her Boots bag out of the way, she began to sing a song that she knew from church, but this time she changed the words as she knew that this was her who was the blessed one. My soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God my Saviour, for he has looked with favour on his lowly servant. The song spoke of how God turns the world on its head, where the lowest become the most important and the highest are brought low. Mary sang of how God had chosen her, a teenage girl from Drayton, for such an important role, to be the mother of God. After the singing and hugging, Liz told Mary that she was pregnant and that her child was kicking inside her as she opened the door. Then somehow, in a way that she could not describe, she knew that Mary too was pregnant and that her child was blessed. Mary stayed with Liz for a weekend, but on Sunday night, as she got back on the bus to Drayton, she knew that she would have to tell Joe, and the joy of her time with Liz began to fade, and the fear returned. A couple of days later, Mary and Joe were walking down the canal in the spring sunshine. Joe was in a good mood, as he had just got a big job and would be able to save up enough money for a deposit on a flat. Full of the excitement of the possibilities, he was talking and talking. "When I get this job done, we will have enough to get the flat sorted. We can get some furniture from Argos, that's cheap, and the odd thing we can get from Wilko's and B&M. We don't need a lot, but a few pictures from B&M will make it look really nice. And I can make that Argos stuff look even better than it does." Joe was going on and on, full of it. All the practical things, exciting things, trying to make things the best he could. He was quite sweet, really, when he wanted to be. Mary just couldn't stand it, though. She stopped and said, "Joe, stop it! Listen, just stop it." "Why? We don't have to get the lamps from B&M. We can get them from Shrewsbury if you really want to get something nice." "No, Joe, shut up. Listen, I've got something to tell you. A few weeks ago, this weird thing happened to me. This person came up to me in Lidl's car park and said that God wanted me to have his son and call him Jesus." "You can't take any notice of nutters," Joe said. "No, Joe, listen. When I was talking to the man, or the person, or whoever he was, I had this feeling as if it was God. The man must have been an angel. He asked me if I wanted to have God's son, and I said I couldn't because, we kind of haven't. Mary tried to continue, but Joe just didn't get it. Joe turned to her and said, "Look, Mary, this guy was some kind of religious nut, like those people with the board shouting in Birmingham. It isn't real." "No, Joe," Mary continued. "He said that nothing was impossible for God and that Liz was going to have a child too. So I said yes, I would if God wanted me to." "Liz is pregnant?" Joe replied. "Wow, she's really old. Well, I thought they couldn't have kids. Well, that's a miracle, I suppose." By this point, Mary was close to tears. "Joe, you're not listening. Liz is pregnant because the person was an angel, and he said that she would be pregnant. I'm pregnant with God's son because I said yes." Joe stopped, looked at Mary, tears running down her face, seeing now that she believed this story was true. Then quite slowly Joe said, "You're pregnant." "Yes, I've been trying to tell you so. It's because the angel asked me to have God's son and call him Jesus, and I said yes. That's why Liz is pregnant too." Joe's face changed as the news slipped into his mind. Silence hung for a moment. Then Joe said slowly and tearfully, "Angels don't make people pregnant. Boys in sixth form colleges, they make people pregnant." And he turned away and he walked down the towpath back to his van. And as he walked, he could hear Mary's voice and her tears, but he could not make out the words. He got in his van, parked up by the Talbot pub. He shut the door and he drove off and saw Mary sobbing on the bridge in his wing mirror. A few hours later, the news had sunk in and Joe was livid now. He sat at his laptop, thinking he would tell the whole world what sort of girl Mary really was. Everyone thinks she's so good, but this will show them what she's really like. He was on his computer game, trying to play Civilization 4, anything to take his mind off it, but he dreamed of going on Facebook, updating his status. "Mary is pregnant and it's not mine. Whose is it?" Then share it round everyone. But then Joe remembered how he felt for Mary. He sat there and he shut his laptop and went to bed. The next night, something happened to Joe. Something he could not put into words, something wonderful and terrifying. Getting up in the morning, everything seemed brighter and clearer. Turning on his laptop, he saw 15 messages, mostly from Mary. And he opened the last one, and it just said, "Joe, I love you. It's true." And he hit reply, and then he messaged her, "I know it's true. I love you." Mary and Joe had the same sense of excitement and dread that all first-time parents get. As the time grew closer, things got more fraught. At the ultrasound scan, Joe had disgraced himself by jumping out of his chair and shouting, "It's a baby!" only to receive a wearied look from the nurse, a look that said, "Men, what on earth did they expect to see?" Mary and Joe showed everyone the pictures, that strange fuzzy creature on the ultrasound scan. Joe spent ages putting it onto Facebook and sharing it round everybody. To them, as with most new parents, that fuzzy picture was the most beautiful picture in the world. They received 30 likes on Facebook and loads of nice comments, mostly so simple, "Aw, that's cute." But for Mary and Joe, such a picture had a greater meaning, knowing as they did that this child was special. Yes, every child is a little miracle, that this was the Son of God. But more than that, this child was theirs, and that was enough for them. After all, the responsibility of any child is awesome, let alone a child which is promised to save the world. Just before Jesus was due, Joe received a letter telling him he had to attend the swearing-in ceremony in his hometown of Stiperstones, just outside Shrewsbury. Joe was not impressed with this at all, because he had enough to do without worrying about stupid government bureaucracy. So they got in the van and went down to Stiperstones. Boring was not the word for the swearing-in ceremony. Every few years, everyone had to go to swear their loyalty to the government. This whole process took ages, waiting for people to fill in form after form after form in the right places, ticking all the right boxes. Even in a little tiny village like Stiperstones, the whole process was exhausting. Mary sat in a chair, feeling stranger by the second, feeling a tightness in her lower belly at first, a tightness that began to get more and more intense. Joe saw this and felt even more worried himself. He ran over to her. "What's happening? Is it the baby?" "I don't know. I've never done this before," Mary replied. "It could be those Branston Licks things that I read about in the book," Joe said hopefully. "They're Braxton Hicks contractions, and I don't think it's that at all," Mary replied, feeling a bit patronised, but at least it showed that Joe had read the pregnancy book that she'd given him, even though he didn't take it all in. Eventually, Joe came running over, having done all his paperwork and ticked all the right boxes, and by this time Mary was in the right state. So they chucked her in the back of the van and made off. "I don't think we're going to make it to the hospital, Joe," Mary said, almost in the strains of contractions. Seeing a pub in the village in the distance, he drove up to it and jumped out of the van and ran into the bar. "Look, mate, my girlfriend's having a baby and we can't get to the hospital. Can we come and stay in here for a bit?" "Sorry, mate, I've got no room. We're all booked up. But she's having a baby now. Come on, let us in. She's outside in my van." Eventually, the pub landlord agreed. Mary, being by this point, was terrified and in severe pain. "This wasn't what I wrote in my birth plan. I wanted a TENS machine, gas and air, and a midwife, not a pub." Joe was panicked more than Mary now, so much so that he didn't ring anyone. A woman from the village pushed Joe aside and took charge. Joe could feel his hand being crushed by Mary from each of the contractions. He winced at the pain, at one point only to receive a deathly glare from the ad hoc midwife who was helping out Mary. Suddenly then, there was a shout from the pub landlord. "I can see it! I can see it!" Then a miraculous sound of crying and the sound of a pair of scissors. Mary took Jesus in his arms, wrapped him in a towel, smiling at Jesus, then at Joe. The landlord turned to Joe and said, "Well done, mate." The helpful woman then turned to both men and gave them a knowing glare, looking at Mary, and smiled. A few hours later, when things had settled down a bit, there was a commotion at the door, and there was a sound of strange accents, almost Irish, but difficult to make out. Suddenly, 3 men came in, with a tale more wonderful and ridiculous than that of Mary's. It seemed that these people were Irish travellers from the camp some miles away. They were outside that night, and the whole sky had lit up with shining angels, and told them that there was a Saviour was born in a pub down in Stiperstones. The landlord wouldn't let them in at first. It was only when Joe, on hearing the story, told the landlord to let them in. The travellers were ecstatic with joy, all over little Jesus, saying how wonderful he was, and how wonderful the angels were. Suffice to say that nobody in the pub believed them. After all, these were travellers. The only contact they had with them were people on documentaries on TV and a brief conversation about tarmacking and trimming edges. Travellers returned to the camp, telling everyone what had happened, and nobody believed them. But Mary and Joe knew it was true, as they sat there in the cold back room, they wondered what would become of them and their child.
Kiss Mary?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Mwah.
Aw. And don't forget to bow.
Boo.
Hope you enjoyed the show.
Thank you for coming. And see you next time. Bye.
So thanks for watching the Silly Vicar Show. If you liked it, you want to see more, subscribe underneath. And thanks to Andrew for being our production assistant today and helping us with all the different special effects. And as well, if you like it, like me on Facebook, Instagram, or read my blog at the bottom. So see you next week.